All right, so I'm here with Melanie and Gin of the Intermittent Fasting Podcast. Really excited to hang out with you ladies and hear some of the cool stuff you've been working on in the IF world and what you found to really take your health to the next level and accelerate fat loss. But before you two became experts in this space, maybe we'll start with Melanie. You can give us a little bit of an idea, what was your background? Where were you at in your life before you kind of took the deep dive into IF and the paleo ancestral health community?
Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here, Anthony. Thank you for having us. So as far as my diet history goes, I was always doing the crazy fad diets, trying to lose weight. I did everything. Calorie counting was the main thing. I would do crazy things like the cookie diet. And I would try vegetarianism. Not that that's bad, but it didn't work for me.
Wait,
but I was always just trying something.
How did I
cookie diet? That's you missed this? Yeah, it's where you basically have shipments of cookies sent to your door, and you replace your meals with them. And I did this for a good few months when I was in college. These massive boxes would show up with these cookies, and you eat them.
Is this done with the intention of losing weight?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Are these different?
Mm-hmm. And
these
now,
different from any other cookies? Is there anything special?
Apparently, I guess they're supposed to just blast away your fat and get rid of your appetite. But I mean, now it's funny because I'm very whole foods oriented now, and I'm very not processed food. I'm not a processed food lover. And I looked up the ingredients recently of these cookies, and it's just terrible. Not the best. So needless to say, none of that was ever very effective for me. I would just kind of oscillate around the same few pounds. But then in college, my personal timeline was I first found low carb, and that was when I discovered that there was something to what you eat versus calorie counting or anything like that. Health was somehow related to macronutrients and what you're putting in your body. And then the second aspect was intermittent fasting, which is our topic today. But I've been doing that for about 7 years, and that just really changed my perspective on food, on health, on energy, on everything. And that was the first time that I really started. Fat loss seemed to be effortless all of a sudden. And all of a sudden I was on a team with my body rather than fighting against it. And I thought it was going to be really difficult the first day. And I said I would do it for a week, and I never stopped. And then since then, I've also adopted a paleo whole foods diet as well. Because I feel the more in tune you become with your body and with eating, the more it extends from the fasting to what you're eating as well, because you just become in tune with how foods make you feel. So that's my personal story.
Oh, that's great. Okay, couple rapid fire questions.
Yes, ready.
When you started becoming conscientious of your carb intake, and seeing some of these benefits, what were some of the things that you were eating that you hadn't been eating before?
So when I switched, so for the low carb, before that, it was really just about weight loss, and it was really just about calorie counting. When I went low carb, I cut out it was more not really what I started eating, but what I cut out, which was grains and sugar. And that was the first time that it wasn't even about weight loss as much as I felt different as a person. My blood sugar became more regulated, my skin started clearing up, my energy improved. And so that's when I really and I was losing weight. So that's when I became a bit obsessed with the science of fat burning and food and all the stuff.
Oh, nice. I love it. And when you started intermittent fasting, because after Gin shares her story, I'll kind of talk about my first dive into intermittent fasting, which was kind of an epic fail.
Oh no! I'm excited to hear.
How did you start with intermittent fasting? Did you do 16/8 or and maybe you can explain intermittent fasting for if there's someone listening that doesn't know what it is. Maybe you could give an explanation.
Sure. So intermittent fasting, it's basically a pattern of eating where you restrict the hours that you eat each day rather than the amount of food you eat. So it's a lifestyle choice. It doesn't have anything to do with how many calories you consume or how much food you consume. It's just the time window that you consume that food in each day. And what it does is it makes your body it forces your body in a way to go into a fat burning mode every day. And it just has an array of astounding health benefits. It's absolutely fantastic for you. But there are a lot of different ways to do it because people do different eating windows. So the way I started was, well, I was always, when I found low carb, started getting in all the online communities and all the message boards and all the posts and all the stuff. And I found this one website, this one post, and it was about the warrior diet, but it was talking about eating. Oh, dog! It was about eating one meal per day, basically at night.
Or your whole
and it had just Yep, exactly. Yeah. That's the author of the Warrior Diet, and it just had hundreds and hundreds of comments testifying about how amazing it was. And so I was like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to jump in. I'm only going to eat one meal tomorrow. I thought it would be miserable. It really wasn't that bad, and I never stopped. So that's that.
Awesome. I love it. Jen, where were you?
Yes.
Where were you before intermittent fasting? And
I was like really fat. No, I laugh about it, but I was. I'm a good bit older than Melanie, so I have more decades of diet history. I'm 47 now, so
whoa,
yeah.
I thought you were in your 20s.
There you go. I'm 47. No, because intermittent fasting is the fountain of youth, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
Actually, it is. We can get into that. But like Melanie, I tried almost every diet over the decades, starting from the 90s. My first diet, actually the 80s, my first diet attempts were, of course, calorie counting because that's what we did. Then we went into low fat dieting and just, the snack well era where we just ate a bunch of low fat garbage all the time. And just from that point on, I always was in search of the perfect diet. And so I just read all the books. I mean, I never did the cookie diet, I have to admit. I did not. I've always been more of a savory eater than a sweet eater, but I tried everything that came along. I finally discovered intermittent fasting for the first time in 2009, but I wasn't ready for it yet. I kept trying to turn it into like a short-term diet. And so I had like a dieter mindset instead of like, this is going to be my lifestyle. So I would go back to it like for a week or something. I don't even think I gave my body time to get into the fat burning state. And then I would stop and then I would start. And of course it didn't work because I didn't give it time to work until finally in 2014, I went on a family vacation and we had like family photos and I was 44 years old. And when we got back home from that cruise, I looked at the photos and I weighed 210 pounds. So it like shocked me into, okay, I've got to do something. I was really overweight. I was probably on my way to type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. I had the abdominal fat. It was awful. And so I said, it's time to get serious. So basically, I still wasn't quite sure how I was going to make intermittent fasting work for me. But in 2014, I committed and I went on to lose over 80 pounds. And I've been maintaining that loss now for over 2 years. So it just gets easier and easier over time. Unlike most diets where people struggle, and they regain the weight, that hasn't been an issue. In fact, I continue to lose. And my husband's like, stop losing weight. But my body isn't still quite done. With the
good problem
fat.
to have.
It is. It's a very good problem to have. I just had to give away a bunch of my shorts to a friend. She came over and gave them to her. Shorts that are now too big.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So when you guys started making these changes in your life, like was there something that you were seeking, like a change that you were after? Was it just like that you were dissatisfied with the excess body fat, or was it like was suboptimal health manifesting itself in other ways? Were you tired? Were you depressed? Or was it just body composition?
Well, at first, I have to say, I mean, at 210 pounds on a 5'5" frame, it was unhappiness with the amount of fat that I had. I felt terrible. It was miserable going through life that heavy. So I started off wanting to lose the fat. But the more that I read about fasting, the more I learned about it, the more I saw other people going through it through the online communities, the more I realized it was about health. And so now I would not stop intermittent fasting for any reason because of the fact that it's tied to health and longevity more so than just now I'm at my ideal body weight.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah. And as for me, so it was mostly, vanity driven, just the whole wanting to lose those extra few pounds, just being a bit obsessed with that. But it's interesting. Once I did adopt an IF protocol, things went away that I didn't realize were bothering me as much. So for example, like my skin just really improved. Things like headaches. I used to get headaches normally, and I thought that was just kind of normal. And those stopped as well. I stopped catching colds as much. So I wasn't in like a terrible like feeling physically. But then when I did adopt IF, it just really changed so many things for the better. And like Jen said, I would not, for the health benefits, I would not stop IF now. It's not about weight loss at all anymore now, at all. It's just for the health, really.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And like, so before we dive into the nitty gritty, you guys mentioned something really important. And that was like the difference between having a dieter's mindset and then kind of like where you're at today. And you had said like when you started, you kind of had that dieter's mindset. Can you kind of compare and contrast a dieter's mindset versus where you're at now?
Exactly. I felt, when you have a dieter's mindset, you're on the diet or you're off the diet, you start the diet, you stop the diet, and you feel like once you get there, like, okay, I'm at goal now, I can go back to my normal life. That's what a dieter and how a dieter thinks. But if you are living a healthy lifestyle, you don't stop it because you're choosing to live that lifestyle for the health benefits that it gives you. So once I made that switch, it really turned effortless because I was like, well, I'm never going to stop doing this, because it's a lifestyle for health. I'm not trying to diet, and it doesn't feel like a diet. And you no longer feel like, you don't feel like you're restricting anything to the point that it's difficult, if that makes sense. You don't feel like you're giving anything up. You, instead of dreading like, oh, I can't eat till later. It's not like that at all. I'm like feeling so good during the day, and I'm excited that later there'll be a good meal, but I'm not like driven to think about food all the time. It's really a very freeing way to live. And people can't understand it who eat in a more typical, all day pattern. They can't imagine that you could be happy this way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's such an added stressor in our lives to need to like meal prep. Especially if you're still on a program that's like 6 meals a day, eat every 2 hours. It's like you're packing a backpack before you leave the house, and like you can't eat anything when you're on the road. And like when you're doing IF, it's like the complete opposite. You're just like, oh, there's nothing good to eat, I guess I'll just fast.
Right. Well, like right now is usually when I would be breaking my fast right now, but we have this call happening. And so, or this podcast. And so I said, well, I'll just do that later. And it's not a big deal. I'm not like, oh my God, I need to be eating while we're talking. It's not a problem.
It's ridiculously freeing. I can't even describe how amazing it is. And you go from like going back to the dieter's mindset thing. When I was in the dieting fixation, you always feel like you're atoning for everything. So like you're restricting when you eat, and then when you eat, you feel like you have to make up for it. You have to like work it off, and then you have to restrict again. And it's just, honestly, it's just miserable. And now it's just so freeing. I don't even, you learn to look at food with no fear, but instead with as like nourishing and wonderful and delicious, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, so. It's great. I mean, my first experience with intermittent fasting, I think it was probably Ori's book that I came across, and like it's fun. We've had him on this podcast too, and he's just like, I mean, man's a wealth of knowledge. But like I was going through so much other stuff. Like I had digestive issues and like chronic fatigue and everything else. And I was like, maybe intermittent fasting is the answer. So I'm like, the first time I tried just stopping eating, I was like, I'm going to do 1 meal today. Now, granted, that 1 meal, I had an Italian dinner planned with my parent, like Maggiano's. But I was like, if I could just hold on until dinner, like maybe this will solve all of my challenges that I have going on. And I'm just like sitting in the chair trying to muscle my way through the day, miserable. Like in the cartoons, how you see them like dream, like people start looking like chicken drumsticks and stuff. That's like kind of how I was. And we went to Maggiano's, and I was getting like chicken parmesan and like 2 things of pasta and a big salad. And I just crushed all of it. And, I'm eating the bread on the table too. And then I was like, oh, this intermittent fasting stuff doesn't work.
Oh, wow. So was it a 1 day? You did it 1 day. Did you do another day?
No. So then I realized it was probably like all of the garbage that I ate that had a bigger role than the timing of things. And but I remember like when I started doing it seriously, it was still difficult at the beginning for me to go like even 14, 15 hours. Like I had to kind of like work my way up to 16 hours. Now there was some candida and some SIBO going on that like were also triggering some cravings of their own. SIBO being small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And like, but yeah, and then I gradually started working myself up to 18 hours and 24 hours. And, you know, now I've done some much longer than that. Were you guys able to just dive right in, or what was your experience?
Well, for me, this is Jen. I actually tried to go keto right before, because, you know, I knew I needed to lose weight. So I tried to go keto, low carb. So I had been actually doing that for a few months. And then I didn't lose a single pound, which shows how I was not going to give up. I mean, I did keto the entire summer, did not lose a single pound, but I think that might have helped my body transition into the fat burning state, so that when I switched over to intermittent fasting, my body was fat adapted. So then it was like effortless. And, you know, I had tried for 2009 to 2014, never could make it work. But now suddenly my body was fat adapted, and intermittent fasting was like so easy. And I was reintroducing carbs at the same time. So it was like the best of both worlds. And I immediately started losing weight, even with reintroducing carbs. So then I was like, this is it for me. And then I never looked back from that very moment. So I think that really
and
helped.
I like Jim, similar story. Since I was low carb already, my body was fat adapted, as it were. So I think it made the transition to IF a lot easier, because when your body's used to running on fat stores, it just does better going without food. So I think that definitely helped everything. But actually, like Jen as well, I actually eat higher carb now. Whole foods.
Neither of us are low carb now. Neither of us eat a low carb diet. We eat plenty of carbs. So
I mean, mine's probably low carb compared to standard American diet, but it's definitely not keto.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yes.
totally. I went through some similar phases, and like, you know, where like every carb was the devil unless it was like
yes.
And,
oh my goodness, yes.
And then, but like, I also like wasn't savvy enough to like stop doing CrossFit and like these insane workouts. So I'm sitting there basically like just running my glycogen into the gutter, and
Man.
wonder why I'm not bursting with energy.
Right.
And but what you guys described, or Jen, what you described with the with going keto and like not experiencing any results, it's like it's so common, right? And there's a lot of different reasons, but I think that some of the things that are hard, unless you're like drill sergeant anal about tracking everything, are, you know, so we all know like fat, you're getting 9 calories for every gram of fat, whereas like you're getting like 4 for carbs and protein. So it's super easy to overeat. And,
I think I was overeating.
Yeah. I mean, I know I was for a long time. I was like, I'm going ketogenic, and I'm like, why am I getting fat? And then I was like, well, maybe because you're putting like a cup of olive oil on your salad. There's like a pool of olive oil at the bottom of the salad bowl. That was a clue. And then the other thing too is like, this is a transition like that we're making metabolically. And if we're used to a ton of carbs, maybe there's some blood sugar issues there. And we know that like when we have blood sugar dysregulation, or just elevated blood sugar levels, and then we're consuming a ton of dietary fats, like our body's just more likely to store that as fat.
Right.
And I think a lot of people experience that, and they're like, paleo doesn't work, keto doesn't work. Like, and some of this is, you know, give your body a chance, stick with it long enough, but also be mindful of, you know, if you're like me and there's like a bowl of, you know, a cup of olive oil at the bottom of your salad bowl, like it is easy to overeat when you're doing a fat-based diet.
Yeah.
I also didn't feel well. I didn't feel well ever, even though I feel like I was fat adapted. Obviously, it was the fat I was eating more so than the fat on my body. But I didn't feel good. And when I added back carbs, especially when I eat high quality carbs, I just feel so much better. So.
Yeah. And I was going to say to that point, as far as the food goes, like I do think, I don't want to completely bash keto, because I do think it does work for some people. And I think that's the thing, is that individualized nutrition is really just about finding, as far as the food goes, what works for you. It's like that recent study they did where they found people's glycemic responses to different foods varies so widely that you can't even make any like assumptions about anything really. Like one person will react to a banana, not a cookie. Another person will to a cookie and not a banana. But the nice thing about intermittent fasting is it's completely bypassing the whole food question in a way. It's not, it's regulating blood sugar, not by depending on what you're eating, but rather by what you're not eating.
Exactly.
So it bypasses that completely.
The magic's in the fasted state for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we regulate our hormones and.
Yeah, we're kind of at this turning point now where I think a lot of people are starting to, it's kind of like the third wave, right? For like throughout history until like the early 1900s, there was all of these different, you know, there was traditional Chinese medicine, there was herbalists, and there was chiropractic, and there was Western medicine. And then it just kind of became about Western medicine and prescription for a long time. And with that transition, a lot of people gave away their power and responsibility for their health. And it was like, if it wasn't coming from your doctor, it wasn't, you know, you shouldn't do it. And I think now a lot of people are taking back that power, and they're looking for answers, what works for them, what makes them feel good, Gin, as you were like really tuning into with your journey. And I think that, you know, our nutrition is a big foundational component of that, as is intermittent fasting. And, yeah, it's cool. I mean, for so long, we've been focused on growth, you know, like there was like the bodybuilder wave where everybody wanted to be like, like whatever you do, don't go catabolic.
I know. Eat everything all the time.
You should always be eating. And then you're like, wait a minute, like this guy's huffing and puffing going up a flight of stairs. Maybe, you know, maybe this isn't the best approach. And now we're saying like, wait, there are some benefits to stopping all this consumption. And like letting our body clear out some of these old, weak cells. And so you guys mentioned intermittent fasting, the fountain of youth. What are we seeing in the science, the empirical evidence, anecdotal stuff about the benefits of intermittent fasting? What are you guys excited about?
Well, actually, it's huge in the medical community right now as far as the research goes. Did you see the 2016 Nobel Prize in Medicine, Anthony?
I did not.
Well, guess what it was about? It was about the process of autophagy. Have you heard of autophagy?
Yeah.
That is what is triggered when you are fasting. And so once you deplete your glycogen stores and you get into ketosis, which happens with intermittent fasters every day during the fast because we have depleted them over time. So now we can get into ketosis. But once you're in that state of ketosis, your body does something called autophagy, where your body is taking out the cellular trash. And the research on autophagy is actually so exciting because that's where our bodies can take out the damaged parts that don't need to be there. And it has amazing anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, anti-Alzheimer's, anti-aging. That's where the fountain of youth comes in. If we have that healing period during the day, then our bodies are less likely to deteriorate. And I think the fast is what does that for us.
Yeah. And then historically, like calorie restricted diets have been the most studied as far as longevity is concerned. But most people are not so down for long-term calorie restriction, although there is the Calorie Restriction Society, I suppose. But more recently, they've been doing more and more studies on intermittent fasting, and they found that it seems to work with similar mechanisms as calorie restriction as far as longevity is concerned. It seems to activate similar genes, and like Jen talked about with the autophagy, but there's just a myriad of mechanisms by which it increases lifespan. So it's really exciting, honestly, because it allows you to, it's a sustainable lifestyle compared to calorie restriction, but still providing the benefits of longevity.
Yeah. I like to kind of think of it as, you know, we're living in a world where we're exposed to more toxins than ever before in history, right? And we know that generally speaking, digestion and detoxification are two opposing processes. So if you're like constantly eating food and constantly digesting, you're not detoxifying as effectively as you could be in a world where we're being bombarded by toxins. And you guys talked about like when you fast, when you give your digestion a little bit of a break, like that apoptosis and autophagy has a chance to occur. You clear out the old junk. Your body kind of like, it's like doing a pit stop at the NASCAR, right? You know, you get some new tires and like you're ready to go. and it plays a huge role in just maintaining not just like youthful energy levels, but youthful appearance, body composition. And that's really, really cool. And maybe you guys can go into a little bit of some of the impact that Masita's going crazy over here, our multi-poop. Maybe you guys could go into a little bit of the benefits, or not the benefits necessarily, but the effects of free radicals, and what happens with free radicals when we're eating all the time versus fasting.
Do you want to start or shall I start?
Why don't you start?
Okay. So free radicals are actually one of the main proponents attributed to aging. And so it's basically the things we take in, that we can take them in through our environment, through toxins. They're also generated as a byproduct of energy metabolism, so they're occurring naturally anyway. And they also are generated by the body as interestingly, as its own defense mechanism as well. But in any case, what free radicals do is they create oxidation in the body, and they basically deteriorate cells. And so they're a huge, huge problem for aging. And in today's society, we're just getting slammed with them, in all honesty. But thankfully, our body is set up to mitigate that itself, and we can lend a hand in that. Intermittent fasting is so anti-inflammatory, and it actually, by changing the fuel substrate for cells and by not eating all the time, you're not generating as much of those reactive byproducts. You actually, in the fat burning state, create a more clean burning source of energy. So that's super helpful. And then, so it's just amazing. And then I could go into a whole tangent because I just did I'm also a big wine drinker, and I just did all the research on free radicals and polyphenols and all of that, but that's a different topic.
Well, I think we're going to go into that after gin, because I think a bunch of
I love my wine.
Just perked up when you said wine.
Melanie is our wine expert. Of course, I like to just drink it, but
yes.
And what Melanie said, that's actually right on target with it. When I don't have a lot to add, but just it goes back to the fasted state. That's where the benefits are. That's where our body is healing and restoring, and we have a chance to, as I said before, take out the cellular trash and take care of the housekeeping that needs to go on. We're not constantly putting more and more into our bodies. We're not in that fed state all the time, so that our body has time to handle things and deal with it.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like when I started going down this journey, and my paradigm opened up that like there's so much more to health and energy than just food, and exercise. Mm-hmm. I had this fragmented view of everything. I was like, here's how you fix your adrenals, and here's how you fix your thyroid, and here's how you fix your digestion. And then it's like, and now it's kind of come full circle and like simplified to detoxification and getting your energy production, your mitochondria working better. And like so much is like, if you do those two things, like if you get autophagy, like back working properly, and apoptosis going on, and like you allow your body to detox by not eating all the time, which is also more convenient than preparing 6 meals a day, things start to take care of themselves. Let's talk about polyphenols, and maybe, we're definitely going to talk about wine. So I want to hear about wine.
Yeah.
Like everybody that like glazed over when we went into the nerd speak heard wine and was like,
what?
Awesome. You can drink wine? What?
Here, I'll take one. Let's talk about polyphenols, maybe resveratrol if relevant, blueberries, and of course wine, and
coffee.
Coffee, yeah.
Yeah, and what role they play in health, fat loss, longevity, energy production.
Yeah, well, so I love what you said about the fragmented mindset that we so often get into. It's so true that we experience a health problem and we think there's a single solution to it, when really I think a holistic approach to everything is key, which is also why I think a lot of people, things all happen together. Like they'll be fine, and then all of a sudden digestion will go to whack, and their thyroid, and all of this stuff. But then on the flip side, if you can get into a healing state, support, like you said, your mitochondria, your energy, you can really just heal rapidly all over. So I love your approach, your holistic view of everything. So as far as polyphenols are concerned, going back to those free radicals, polyphenols are a great dietary way to support an antioxidative state. So they really do combat free radicals in the body. They're super abundant in fruits and vegetables, but they're also particularly high in wine because grapes are naturally high in polyphenols. They're found a lot in the grape skin and the seed. So when you're creating wine, and then also polyphenols, interestingly, they're generated by the plant as a defense mechanism against pests. So they're created when the plant is not created, but they're enhanced when the plant is injured. So when we're making wine from grapes, we're macerating grapes, we're crushing grapes, we're actually increasing their polyphenol content in the ultimate wine beverage. And then when wines are often aged in oak, and oak can instill its own polyphenols. And so you mentioned like resveratrol. Going back to like the segmented view of things, people do like to pull out like a single polyphenol, like, resveratrol is the answer, or whatever. But there's actually potentially hundreds of polyphenols found in grapes and also in wine, and they likely work synergistically together. So I do think it's more healthy. I think people should turn to a glass of wine rather than a supplement of resveratrol or a refined form to address their oxidative state. But yeah, I love some wine. I think it's great for health, and the polyphenol benefits are amazing.
And if
That's why my book. Sorry.
Oh, I totally cut you off. That's why my book.
I was just gonna say, so my book is the What, When, Wine diet, and so the what is paleo, the when is intermittent fasting, and the wine is wine.
Wine. There's going to be a bunch of people running to pick that up immediately, opening it in another browser. If you were on a desert island and you could only have one type of wine with you,
oh my goodness,
what would it be? Like, you can get as specific as you want, if you want to name brands or anything like that.
Oh. So,
gosh, I'm interested in what Melanie's going to say to this one.
It would have to, it'd have to be, I think it would be Hall Cabernet. An organic, it would be a really nice organic Cabernet. And I wonder if they're biodynamic. I'd have to go do some research. I would want to find a really top of the line biodynamic organic Cabernet that's high in tannins, high in polyphenols. Yes. Definitely.
And you mentioned Hall. Is that Hall?
Mm-hmm, I do like Hall.
Hall.
I was just thinking about one of my favorites. Yeah.
Okay, nice. And it's Gin. Do you have one?
Well, I actually love Prosecco the most.
Oh, yes.
And I love Prosecco. I love the bubbles. But Melanie has convinced me that I need to drink more red. So I am making an effort. Now, I love red wine too. I always have loved red wine. I'm more of a Zen girl. I love a good Zen. Red Zen, not to be confused with what we drank in the 90s, which was white Zinfandel, which you're not getting the same benefits out of that. But because they take the skin out when they're processed. But anyway, right, Melanie, did I explain that well?
Yeah, well, the rosés, they're just slightly in contact with the
they take it out
skin
sooner in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting a lot more benefits from the red wines. So I do drink Prosecco, and probably on a desert island, I would rather just have Prosecco because, I'm just now. So if in my regular life, I try to add the red, but on a desert island, I'm going to drink Prosecco because I just need that.
How about you, Anthony? Anthony, what do you have?
So for a while I had a delivery of dry farm wines coming every other month.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And they're pretty good about making sure they include a good amount of either organic or biodynamic, and they put it through a rigorous testing and laboratory process, at least as far as wine is concerned. And then I was turned on to some other biodynamic wines, but now a lot of times, I stopped doing that because I was either drinking too much. Or it's like one bottle turns into 3, and the next morning you're like, oh, I was supposed to do so much with it. But I did notice the hangover is still much less if you're drinking like good quality wine versus, the $2 Chuck, and which was like, it's a college wine. But now I look for, if I have an option and I'm like out at a restaurant, I'm looking for what is a red, like a Pinot Noir or a Cab, that was from Spain or France, ideally. And that's like, those are like my quick hacks. And I'll even ask if I narrow it down and there's more than one, I'll say like, hey, which one of these is cleaner? Which is like kind of wine speak for like less likely to make me feel like garbage when I wake up tomorrow.
Right.
And you can get a lot of data just looking for like where it's from. You narrow it down to the cab and the Pinot Noir and then say, which one's cleaner? It's like, that's what people kind of understand. Yeah. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
That's awesome. And then also I would like bring it back to intermittent fasting because we get the question a lot about whether or not you can drink with intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
And that's one of the awesome benefits as well, is that you can definitely have wine or alcohol in your eating window and still experience that help. Well, first of all, alcohol itself does have health benefits, as does wine, but it does pair very well with intermittent fasting. So yeah, that's another benefit.
Absolutely. Although I do have to say, this is just my own little warning. I'll be the mom here.
Oh, yes. I know what you're going to say.
You do not want to start off just straight with the alcohol. If you've been fasting for like 19, 23 hours, you don't want to start off with like a big old, like, don't start with the wine by itself. I always like to have a little food with it, because if you're in the fasted state and you start drinking, you're going to be sorry.
I'm breaking
it
my
hits you.
Yeah. I learned that the hard way. I'm not going to tell any stories now, but let's just say I will never drink bourbon again.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
Not even kidding.
Vodka for me.
You guys mentioned organic, and that it was, you know, it is kind of a nice link between the polyphenols and then the organic versus conventional, and some of the like natural defenses that are, you know, created by these plants. And like, maybe we could talk a bit about, like such leading questions.
You don't have to talk about this, but talk about this.
if I ask a question that you're like not excited about, you be like, next. But like, what happens when we cover grapes in this example with pesticides versus grapes that are organic and have to kind of like fight for their life and defend themselves against insects more? And then how does that translate to health benefits for us when we consume those plants?
Yeah. So two major points to bring to that. First of all, like I said, so a lot of the protective compounds in plants are generated when the plant is having to fight for itself in a way. So when we're spraying these plants with pesticides, we're actually down regulating their need to do that. So the studies have found that organic produce often has more beneficial compounds compared to the conventional produce. Right. But then even worse, the health benefits of pesticides, I really think we're just now realizing, and I think we'll continue to realize how potentially detrimental they are to our health. Yep. And I read this fascinating study the other day. And so interestingly, with pesticides, they're determined to be generally recognized as safe by looking at the main active component in a pesticide. So Roundup, I'm not sure exactly like what it is, but like, so for Roundup, they look at the main active pesticide, and that's how they determine if it's safe or not, when in reality, these pesticides have multiple compounds in them that aren't even listed, and they're categorized as inert. But the studies have found that together, when you actually look at the entire pesticide compounds, the health effects are insane. The toxicity and everything is just really terrible. It's terrible. Yeah. And I think they found that studies have linked it to problems with the gut microbiome, to different cancers, to reproductive problems. And I just think it's a much bigger problem than we realize. And so I'm really happy that organic, even if it seems like it's like a fad or something, I'm glad that it's becoming more mainstream.
I'm glad you mentioned the gut microbiome, because that's what I was gonna mention. But that's exactly right. All these chemicals that we're putting in our bodies aren't just bad, you know, all around our bodies. They're also terrible in the gut microbiome. And I'm doing a lot of reading about that. Have you done any reading about that recently, Anthony? I'm pretty sure you have.
Yeah. And I mean,
that's the seed of our health. I mean, we are healthy from our gut. You know, if our gut is unhealthy, we're unhealthy. I know you mentioned SIBO that you suffered with, but as far as the organic goes, I make sure when I'm fasting, I drink coffee in the morning, and that is absolutely a deal breaker for me is non-organic coffee. I stick to organic coffee only because if I'm fasting and I'm putting something into my body, I want it to be the best quality. So
what's your
organic
go-to?
coffee. Well, I go to Costco and they have different types there. So it varies. I'm not married to a certain brand. I try a bunch of different things. And my son is we both drink our black coffee, my 17-year-old and I. So, he'll say, oh, this one is not strong enough or whatever. So we don't have like a particular favorite brand. We try them all. Right now we're drinking a Cuban organic coffee. I can't remember the name of the brand, but it's Cuban and it's like very robust.
Nice.
I'm a Bulletproof coffee girl over here. Mine is actually, I don't do the Bulletproof coffee style with like the added fat and everything. But I do like the brand, especially for the lack of mold toxins and everything, because actually so I lived, not like you lived in an apartment for 3 years with mold. I lived in an apartment for 3 years with mold, got food poisoning and got SIBO as well. That's the part that's like you. So I've become really in tune with how toxins affect the body and mold specifically and all of that. But so my coffee, I'm a Bulletproof coffee girl.
Yeah. I think it makes a big difference. If we're drinking it during the day, we want to make sure it's the highest quality possible during the fast, more than anything else. I mean, I'm not married to organic constantly for everything. I think organic dairy is very important, but during the fast, it makes a difference.
Yeah. I'd be curious, what do you guys say, and if you haven't experienced this, that's another story, but what do you say when someone tells you that organic doesn't matter and you're just wasting money?
Well, it's not my job to convince them, but I just give them the look. I'm an elementary teacher. You may not know that. I've been teaching school for 27 years, so I just look at them. I don't even have to answer that, People can think whatever crazy stuff they want to think. But, I mean, I think it's very, very clear as soon as you start to understand how the human body works, you start putting things that aren't meant to be in the human body, it's not going to work the same way. So to me, if I have to argue with somebody about that, I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of to that point, it actually brings up another question of sorts or topic to cover. As far as people saying like, oh, it's all about calories. Okay. So people backlash basically. So people questioning what you're doing or judging what you're doing or telling you you're wrong or what you're doing isn't going to work. And that happens a lot with intermittent fasting, just having social issues with people. And Jen and I get a lot of questions on the podcast about how to deal with that and how to respond to people. And so like for me personally, I think that, it's great to be very informed in what you're doing as far as health goes. So like with the organic and then with intermittent fasting and just have that wealth of knowledge. But of course, I don't think you want to if somebody's like, oh, what you're doing is wrong, you don't necessarily want to be like, well, here's all these studies, and you don't want to overwhelm them or anything. So I think just having that in the back is really key. And then just being confident in what you're doing and knowing why it works, and realizing that everybody has what works for them individually.
Yeah.
But because that's the social issue and people's responses is definitely a big thing to deal with.
For sure. So we've probably got two types of people that are hanging out with us today. And there's people that have never heard of intermittent fasting before and maybe are a little bit interested in the fountain of youth and ramping up their detoxification and fat loss and all of that fun stuff. And then there's probably people that have tried intermittent fasting, whether that's 16/8 or, the warrior, 1 meal a day approach or something like that. If you were to give one tip to the beginner who's never fasted, and one tip to someone these can be separate tips, one tip to someone that's more advanced and maybe tried fasting but didn't have a good experience, what would you say? We'll start with the beginner.
My advice would be the same for both of them. Yeah. And I think it's so important. And I run a couple of Facebook support groups. We have over 20,000 members in the groups combined. And so I talk to a lot of beginners every single day about intermittent fasting and also the people who have been doing it for years. And actually they make one of the same mistakes, which is why I'm mentioning it for both. And that is keeping the fast clean, I think, is the most important part. That's how we refer to it in our groups. But people want to have artificial sweeteners, and they think that something is 0 calorie, that it must be okay for the fast, because they think that, well, I'm fasting, I'm not having any calories, I can have this diet soda, or I can put this artificial sweetener in my coffee, or even stevia. They're like, well, stevia is all natural, it's fine, it's organic, I can use it. But actually, no. The mistake that most people want to make when they're beginning, or if they've been doing it for a long time and they don't realize, is they want to have that artificial sweetener, or the stevia, but we know that that causes an insulin release because your tongue doesn't understand. And so they've actually done studies in mice or rats, one of the two, where they would put the sweet taste on their mouth and insulin was released. They could measure it. Then they cut the nerve from the tongue to the brain. And when they put the sweet taste on the tongue, no more insulin release. So it shows that it's the perception of the sweet taste that causes the insulin to be released. And if you know anything about the fat burning state, we know that insulin is a hormone that when you have a lot of insulin in your system, you're not burning fat. So if you want to reap all the benefits of the fat burning state, you want to keep your insulin as low as possible. So you may think, well, I'm just drinking this diet soda all day long. It's 0 calories. How can it possibly be affecting me? But if it's causing your body to release insulin all the time, you're actually not doing yourself any good. Not to mention, of course, the effects that those types of things would have on your gut microbiome. They have other health problems too. But both beginners and some people who have been doing it for a while don't realize that this is the most important thing. And frequently people who have been trying it for a while will say, you were right. I cut out the sweetener in my coffee and all of a sudden the fast was easy. I'm like, I told you. I wasn't kidding.
Since I stopped crushing Coke Zeros, everything fell into place.
As soon as I quit putting that creamer in my coffee, but you really don't want to spike your insulin. You want to avoid anything sweet during the fast, and it really makes a difference. I had a response one time too, before I really realized that even like a fruity flavor could do that. I was drinking some strawberry mineral water. The only ingredient was natural strawberry flavor. It had 0 calories. It had no sweeteners. But right after I drank that strawberry mineral water, within the hour, I got shaky. And that's what you would have happen if you had an insulin release, because insulin's job is to take glucose out of the blood. So I immediately got shaky, like I was having a blood sugar crash. So I knew that insulin had been released, and I had been fasting long enough to know that's not a normal way that I feel during the fast. So I said, all right, this is no joke. So now I just keep the fast very clean. I drink black coffee. I drink sparkling mineral water with no added flavors. And I think that makes all the difference in the world for someone who's starting off too.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Mel, anything that you'd add?
Oh man. Okay.
That's a tough act to follow. Mic drop,
I know.
walk off.
I know. Well, like Jen, I as well benefited when I started fasting clean, which I actually didn't use that term until I met Jen.
Yeah, we made it up. We made it up.
Okay.
In the fasting group. Or I don't know. We just started saying it. And then it kind of took off. Like my first book, I didn't even use that terminology in the book. So
does that pertain to, for like people that are putting, let's say like caprylic acid in their coffee or butter or something like that? Like, would you guys say, is that dirty? Is that fasting dirty?
Well, see, fats are different. Fats aren't going to cause you to have an insulin release the same way. Of course, cream is not a pure fat as an example. It's got some protein in there. It's got some carb content too, a little bit, but that's not going to be as big of a deal. Some people find that during the adjustment period, they may want to have some fats in their coffee to help them adjust. It's not as big of a problem, but of course, then you're not burning the fat from your body. Yeah. You have to decide what's your goal. Do you want to burn the fat from your body or the fat from your coffee cup? Mm-hmm. So,
body.
Yeah.
What do you think, Melanie?
Well, first of all, so back to the advice thing. It's hard because I would want to give so much advice. But I guess for the newbie, I think the main thing I would encourage them to do is when they start intermittent fasting to stay busy and to repurpose their energy. So rather than starting intermittent fasting in a state where they're like, oh, I'm fasting and I need to, just lie around because I'm fasting. They need to probably stay busy, embrace the fasted window as a time of productivity, and the hours will just fly by. And I really think that helps catalyze the transition to intermittent fasting. And then for somebody who's been fasting for a while, if they haven't already, my biggest advice would be to look at what they're eating as well as when they're eating. So if they're not doing like a whole foods diet, or if they're still eating processed foods and all of the nefarious stuff, I would really encourage them to take a look at that and maybe make some different food choices. So those would be my two things.
Awesome. Love the tips. Do you guys measure your blood sugar? Do you use like a glucometer? Do you measure your blood ketones, anything like that? Or was that more something that you did at the beginning and like don't do now?
Well, do you want to go first?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm excited about this question.
Yeah, I like it too. This is a great question because we get this all the time no, I don't measure my blood glucose, but I have measured my ketones. I have one of the breathalyzers that you breathe into, the Ketonics brand. And I got it when I was doing keto, of course, because I wanted to measure that I was, in ketosis. But then when I switched over to intermittent fasting, not even thinking about ketosis at that time, but I realized, hey, I still have this feeling, even though I'm eating carbs now. And so I blew into it and got a reading. I was in ketosis. And one of the biggest misconceptions people have is that you have to either be eating a ketogenic diet or you have to, here's my cat, sorry. You have to either be eating a ketogenic diet or you have to fast for like 48 hours straight before you're going to get into ketosis. But I have verified with my Ketonics breath meter that I am in ketosis every single day during the fast. And it has to do with once you have those depleted glycogen stores. So it's not something you have to do, but it was fun to see that as a verification.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Melanie?
So as for me, actually, I started with the urine analysis strips to measure your ketones.
Mm-hmm.
And I can honestly say that those strips are probably the reason I became obsessed with fat burning and diet and everything, just because it was the first time that, at least to me, it seemed that I could validate my fat burning. Like I could actually see evidence on these sticks of, oh, I'm burning fat. And it just seems so scientific. I don't measure my ketones anymore. And then I also do know that those strips, they can be misleading in a way as to whether or not you're burning ketones. I would love to have a breathalyzer, but they're so expensive. So I haven't been using that. But as far as the blood sugar goes, I historically had never really measured my blood sugar except when I went to the doctor. And I was always seemed to be a little bit slightly higher on the blood sugar and even in the fasted state, which I attribute, it's better now, but I think I attribute that to like cortisol and all of that. But now I actually do have a meter and I've become a little bit obsessed with measuring my blood glucose. I'm really just fascinated by how it is based on, I like to compare it to how I'm feeling and then take it and see what it is and see how that compares. I'm also really interested in personalized nutrition and personal glycemic responses. So I've been playing around with how I react to different foods. But yeah, it's a relatively new part of my scientific self-experimentation, but I do really like having it. I was really nervous because I can't prick myself. But it's not that hard.
Nice. I'm curious, when you noticed your blood sugar was a little bit high, was this did this correlate with the time that you were maybe like dealing with some mold toxicity and some of that stuff that could have been spiking cortisol and those stress hormones?
Interestingly, I actually hadn't even thought about that, but yes, that was the time when I was living in that apartment. It was also when I was way lower carb as well. And I was also doing way more caffeine as well. So I think it's probably the conglomerate of the toxins, the apartment, being super low carb, relying on caffeine a little bit too much. I would just find that even in the fasted state, I would have higher blood sugar. But now I'm really excited whenever I take it. It seems to be almost perfect, especially near like the end of my fast. It's at really good levels. So yeah. I also don't like to read I don't ever want to make too many assumptions in general about a certain reading or anything at one certain time, because I do think there's just so much going on and we're so quick to make assumptions and make generalizations when we don't really know the whole picture. So I am wary of that.
You mentioned something that was like, it reminded me of a question that I ask a lot of clients, which is like, looking at the acute stressors in your life, right? So you were talking about like maybe mold toxicity, maybe calorie restriction, maybe carb restriction. I don't know if intermittent fasting was in there. But at any given time, like we all have a number of acute stressors and chronic stressors that are going on. Mm-hmm. Do you ever like look at someone and you're telling them, look, you've already got too much stress in your life, adding another stress like intermittent fasting may not be the best idea until you knock out some of the other ones? Or has that not been an issue?
I have a lot of thoughts on this one, because that is a common thing that people bring up, is that intermittent fasting is going to be a stressor, that it's going to be a stressful state, and that you shouldn't add it on top of other stressors. But I think the key is separating beneficial hormetic stressors versus chronic stressor. And intermittent fasting is a hormetic stress, similar in a way to exercise. And I think the perception is so key. So I think if people interpret intermittent fasting as a negative stress, then I do think it's going to add to their pre-existing chronic stress. Like it could become a chronic stress for them. But I think if people understand that intermittent fasting itself is actually a beneficial hormetic healing stress, and they're ensuring that they're adequately recovering and they're eating a lot of nutrients and food in their eating window, I do believe that it can benefit the person even if they are experiencing chronic stress. But again, we're not doctors, obviously, and you really have to find what works for you and you have to experiment. But I do think perspective is key. And I've been doing a lot of research recently on how intermittent fasting affects the adrenals and women's like reproductive health and everything. And in general, I'm not finding the studies there. Intermittent fasting without calorie restriction is a negative. It's more restricted dietary protocols that involve fasting that result in dietary restriction, where you're starting to see problems. So yeah, there's a lot going on there, and it's complicated. But I do think it can be a healthy thing even in our stressful environment.
And it also takes a lot of stress off of us. You know, we talked before about when you just don't understand. Well, I mean, you both probably do actually, but some people who are not intermittent fasters may not understand how much pressure it takes off of you, because when you're trying to diet and you're like Melanie mentioned earlier today, and you're trying to be perfect, and every time you eat during the day, you're like, feel like you have to atone for it. Now you're intermittent fasting and you don't have that anymore. You're like, I'm eating in my window and I'm not eating during the day. And it relieves that. Is it time to eat? What should I eat? Am I going to eat? Is this okay? Is this the right food? You've removed all that from your life. So you can relax for the first time, maybe ever, relax about what you're eating and when you're eating it. And I think that's a big plus for the lifestyle.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mel.
I was just going to say, I just think we've become so fearful of stress,
right,
in a way that it has ultimately added stress. I think stress is huge. I think chronic stress is very degenerating, and it's a problem. But I just think that we fixate on it so much that we almost make it worse in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that. Because I'm very anti-stress. So I'm like, stop all the stress and stop stressing about the stress.
It's kind of like the you know, when someone kind of goes on a health kick and it's like everything is bad for you, and you're like,
right?
Like that fear of the world, that like I want to be in a bubble mindset, like that alone is a stress that may very well exceed all of the things you're afraid of.
Absolutely. And you know, when you're like thinking, should I eat this sweet potato because I'm afraid of, and people are afraid of sweet potatoes nowadays. You know, they think it's, you know, carbs, and but that's a big stress right there. If you have to worry, you know, throughout your entire day, if you're eating, you know, for a 12-hour period of your day and you're constantly worried about that food, that's not good for you either.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I don't know if this happened for you ladies, but when I started fasting, I came face to face with a lot of motivations for consuming food that weren't necessarily hunger.
Oh,
yes. Oh, yes.
Boredom. We're bored. We we're like, well, what can I do? I'll go have a snack.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Food has definitely become entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become something to do for fun. And you don't really realize that completely until you do go this period of abstinence and you get those cues that would normally be stimulating you to go eat. And you realize, you just realize all the things that were making you want to eat constantly before. And you have to sit with that. And
you also notice when you become an intermittent faster, you notice how much other people are consuming around you all the time, because, I show up at work and everybody has, a mug of coffee in their hand, but it's not black coffee. It's coffee full of creamer and full of, different things. So they're constantly drinking that all throughout the morning. Then they have lunch. Then in the afternoon, they have something else. And so people are constantly having something come into their body, food or beverage. And you notice that when you're an intermittent faster. Yeah. Everyone seems to rely on that now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was at a corporate training that I was doing a week and a half ago. And I opened up the fridge. We were just giving some examples, and I opened up the fridge, and I'm not exaggerating, there were 15 bottles of creamer. The stuff with corn syrup's the first ingredient or some weird shit like that. You're like, no, how much of this is going in all of your coffee? Just throw this away and you'll be off to a great start.
No, I went to a conference that made me think of this. I went to a conference this spring. They fed us, no lie. I mean, I didn't eat any of it because I was fasting, but they gave us breakfast. Then there was a morning snack coffee break with snacks, and everybody was having little pastries with coffee. Then there was lunch. Then there was an afternoon snack break. Then there was dinner. And I'm like, everybody was constantly, every time we left a session, they would get something else. And I was like, what is everyone was constantly eating, and then they were tired. Everybody was like, oh, I'm so tired. I'm like, I feel great.
That's the thing. You get more energy the farther or for most people, you get more energy the farther you go into your fast rather than the opposite.
That's been one of the biggest benefits for me is just the sustained mental clarity. And I feel like the days that I fast, I get way more done. And,
yes.
It's almost like sometimes I'm kind of hungry, but I don't want to eat because this feels so good.
Yes, I get that all the time.
Absolutely.
Once I eat, my brain sort of shuts down. It's like, okay, time to go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Last question. I'd be curious. We've talked about the importance of finding what works for you, and personalized nutrition and personalized medicine, personalized nutrition, customization, and how ultimately that's what yields the best results. What have you guys found works for you? And more specifically, what does a week look like as it relates to intermittent fasting? Is it a 24-hour fast once a week? Is it every day you're fasting 18 hours and eating in a 6-hour window? Maybe each of you could share with the listeners a rough idea of where you're at right now.
All right. You want to go first, Melanie?
Sure. Yeah, that's a wonderful question because I guess we haven't even really talked about that. So for me, where I have settled is I do daily intermittent fasting. I only eat at night. So I eat one meal, but it's spread out over probably 4 or 5 hours or so. Typically happens later in the evenings. So it varies, but I might start eating as early as 7, as late as even 10 sometimes, which is kind of crazy. I'm a night owl. And then for me, a paleo approach is key for me. So I follow a whole foods diet with meat, vegetables, fruits, healthy fats. I don't eat grains, legumes, dairy, processed or refined foods. And then, of course, I include a hearty dose of wine along with that. And it just works wonderfully for me. So, Jen, how about you?
Well, for me, I am not quite as much of a night owl. I'm an early bird. So I wake up bright and early every morning, but I usually open my window. If I'm working, I don't eat till I get home from work. So it may be 4:30, 5 o'clock before I'll have my first food for the day. So I don't have to take food with me. I basically almost only eat at home now. But I'm home for the summer now. I'm not working. So I may open my window at 4, somewhere between 4 and 5, 5:30, depending on just if I'm busy, what I'm doing. And I'll start with a snack. And by the way, I didn't mention this, but I do this every day. This is, 7 days a week. It's just how I feel best. It's not like I have to follow this regimented plan because I'm cheating if I don't. It's just because I feel better when I wait till this time of the day to open my window. So I'll have a snack, and then I'll, do a few more things before I start preparing dinner. I actually cook for my family every night. So I'll make a meal. So I'll start cooking maybe around, depending on when my husband's going to be home from work. I might start cooking at 5:30 or even 6:30. I haven't cooked yet today, and it's almost 6:30 here. I actually didn't have a snack today either. But it's no big deal. I just kind of, whatever my schedule is, I'll open my window before dinner or while I'm cooking dinner. And then I'll have a really nice dinner, usually with a glass of wine. And then maybe I'll drink a little wine. My husband and I'll watch some TV, or we'll talk, or whatever we are doing that evening. And then maybe some sort of dessert later on. So my window ends up being probably now around 4 to 6 hours. Sometimes it's a little longer than 5. But not usually, just depending on, what time I had my snack, or if I'm having a little dessert at the end.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the importance of finding what works for you and what makes you feel good.
Right.
You're like, look, this isn't dogma. This is like what I've found makes me feel good. And similarly, if someone listening tries a protocol that may have worked well for, Jen or Mel or me or someone else, and it makes them feel like garbage,
right?
There may be a modified version of that makes them feel good. And
exactly.
It's not a one size fits all approach.
No, absolutely not. There are many intermittent fasting protocols, and people in our groups on Facebook will say, what's the best? Well, no, it's the one that you can live with, and it's the one that you can turn into a lifestyle. And you don't have to be so rigid. I mean, if someone next Sunday called me up at 11 a.m. and said, I'd like to go out to brunch with you, and it was a friend I hadn't seen for a while, I'd go have brunch at 11 a.m. if it was important to me and it didn't ruin my day and I haven't cheated on my diet, because it's a lifestyle. So if there's an important, you make you're flexible. You got to enjoy it and live your life.
Yeah, and it when done right, it allows you to have the wine or the desserts and not just go off the rails. And
right,
exactly.
Sean Hadsel was telling me a pretty funny story about how he came up with his Siesta Keys diet. And he was in the Siesta Key, Florida with his family. And like every night they were going out, they were having wine, they were having dessert. And he's like, I lost my abs in like 5 days. And I was like freaking out, because he's like, my whole career is like, I'm the grandpa with abs, And so he's like, I started this Siesta Keys plan. And the foundational component was that he's like, I'd fast all day. And then I'd go out and I'd have wine and I'd have dessert and I'd eat with my family. And then, I'd do my fasted workout in the morning and like wash, rinse, repeat. And he's like, that balance allowed me to maintain while I was still having dessert, while I was still having, and he did some other things that if anyone wants, they could check out the program and get in on that. But no, this has been amazing. I've had a ton of fun with both of you guys.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I loved it. You're wonderful.
Why not? Thank you. So people that want more of your stuff, where's the best? Intermittent Fasting Podcast on iTunes, is that the best place for them to keep up with you? You both have books that are fantastic, and I was reading through those before we jumped on, and there's a lot of gold nuggets in there. Let the listeners who are digging your message know where they can keep up with you ladies.
All right. Well, both of us are at the podcast website, and you can actually get to our personal websites through that. The podcast website is www.ifpodcast.com. And as I said, it links to both of our websites. My personal website is jenstevens.com, and I'm Jen like the liquor, Gin, Stevens with a PH, jenstevens.com. And my book is called Delay, Don't Deny, and it's available Amazon, other online ebook sellers. You can get the paperback version through Amazon or through Barnes & Noble, and the ebook through just anywhere that you normally would get an ebook.
Yeah. And then as for me, so I have podcast.com. My personal blog is melanieavalon.com. And my book is The What When Wine Diet. The original self-published version is The What When Wine Intermittent Fasting for Health and Weight Loss. It's actually currently unavailable because it's been picked up by a publisher. So a new version with about 80% new content. It's like the dream version of the book I always wanted. I'm so excited about it. It'll have recipes, wine pairings, talks about paleo, intermittent fasting, and wine. But it'll be released in stores nationwide in January 2018, but you can pre-order it on Amazon right now. So,
very, very cool.
Yes.
www.ifpodcast.com has everything that you need to follow these ladies and keep up with the cool stuff that they're working on. Mel and Gin, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you guys hanging out, had a blast, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Thank you
Anthony,
for having us.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Fast on.
Yes.